everybody. It's great to be back in Utah. Some of you might not know I used to live here. I actually started my law enforcement career in Provo. I was with Provo PD for 11 years. I started as a meter maid back when I was going to BYU in 1777. I literally started a part-time job as a meter maid. Parking enforcement cadet was the official title, but vernacular, of course, you're a meter maid, and that's what I was. And I went around chalking tires all day long and writing stupid parking tickets. And I've had to repent for all of that, and I have. Then I became a patrol officer, and in 1982, my wife and I, and she's back there at my table where I'm selling my books, my wife and I were asked by the police department if we would both agree that I would go undercover and work about a one-year stint in narcotics and completely undercover. I could not be seen in public with my wife and children, could not go to church, could not do anything that normally Richard Mack would do. I had a new name, I had a new driver's license with that name, and I had to sneak home to be with my wife and kids late at night, and then I had to sneak out to go back to work. And then after that, I was a school resource officer and specialized in juvenile delinquency, and also after that I was a front desk sergeant, and then moved to corporal, and then moved to detective, and finished there as detective, and then moved to Arizona and ran for sheriff in 1988. And I'm from Arizona originally. My wife and I are both from there. And something happened here in Utah right after my undercover assignment in 1983, where I was back on patrol for a few months before I took the assignment in the Provo School District as the school resource officer. It was astonishing. But one day, I had a complete epiphany. While I'm writing a lady a ticket, and the place was 600 West, 300 South, right next to Franklin Elementary School. And what was unusual about this is I'm sitting as close as you legally can to the intersection, and this lady runs a stop sign right in front of me. And I'm in a marked unit. I'm not in an unmarked car. I'm in a marked police car. And she runs the stop sign right in front of me, and I'm going, what on earth is this lady doing? I'm right here. Hello, you're running a stop sign in front of me. And I immediately gazed into her car and surmised and deduced why she did it. Is because she had like 7 or 8 kids in the car, and they were all going crazy, like the Tasmanian devil you see on some cartoons. It was just whirly-derby heads and feet and knees and arms and everything going everywhere. And she was trying to settle her kids down and lost her way on the road, lost track where she was, ran through the stop sign, looks over at me, and throws her arms up in the air as if to say, what else could go wrong today? She immediately pulls over. I get in behind her. I walk up to her, and she already has her license and registration out the window like this. And she knows I'm going to give her a ticket. And I started giving her a ticket. She never said a word to me. She didn't cry. She didn't say what a horrible day she was having, or couldn't you tell my children caused me to do this? I didn't mean to do this. She didn't say a word. She just stared through the windshield past her steering wheel. And okay, I said, great. This is an easy ticket. I don't have to worry about her bawling all day. Her kids were still bawling, some of them, still fighting. She's not there. She's not worried about them. She just kept staring. And I often wondered if she was thinking about her husband that gave her all those kids. and how she was going to really let him have it when she gets home. But I started writing the ticket, and the ticket book back then was about this size, and I'm writing the ticket. And at the end of me signing the ticket, you have to put your serial number and your signature on the ticket. And I paused for a moment, and I looked down at this depressed, dejected, discouraged woman. And I looked over at her snotty-nosed kids. I looked down at her dilapidated, cruddy old car. It was like a compact Datsun station wagon. I said Datsun. It was a Datsun. That shows you how old it was. And that car wasn't worth $250. And it was obvious she didn't have the money for this ticket if it had even been a $5 ticket. And after I looked at her and her kids and her car, I paused again, and I looked at me. And I asked myself a few questions. I said, Mack, is there anything that you're doing here that's helping this family? Are you serving them in any way? Is there anything you're doing here that's making Provo a better place to live? Is there anything you're doing here that's bringing honor to the badge you wear on your chest? And I knew the answer to all three questions. And I walked away ashamed of who I had become. No, I didn't give her the ticket. And I often wonder how long she waited for me to come back, because I didn't say anything to her. I handed her back her license and registration, and I left. And I'm sure she was wondering after 5 or 10 minutes, where'd he go? I drove back to the police station, which was only a couple of blocks away from where I was. I tore up the ticket and put it in the trash can. And then I wondered, the rest of the shift, which ends at 11 o'clock, and this was about 5:30 in the evening, I wondered the rest of the evening why I was a cop, why we have cops, why we have government, why do we write all these tickets? What is it all for? And so I determined that I was going to find out those answers. And I didn't write any more tickets that night. I was too concerned about my career and what I was doing and who I was. The next day, the Lord is leading me to briefing that started at 2:30. He's leading me there early, and I walk around the police department for several minutes looking for some of these answers. And then I go over to the city center side, which is hooked to in the same building, but just on the other side. And I go over to the other side, and I end up in the city clerk's office. And I just stand there in my uniform. And she goes, Officer Mack, can I help you? And to this day, I don't know why I said this, but I did. And I said, when I took my job here, did I take an oath of office? She goes, of course you did. You signed it. And I'm going, I signed it? Did not remember doing that. She made me a copy and handed it to me without me even asking. She could tell I was perplexed. She showed me the evidence. I signed it. I left that office right then, determined that I was going to quit my job. My chosen profession. This is what I wanted to do for my life career. And I'm quitting. I'm already taking off my Sam Brown belt. Going to leave my gun and my belt and my badge on the chief's desk. And I'm leaving my job. I'm not giving 2 weeks' notice. I'm leaving. And then I imagine when I'm getting in the lobby between the city center and the police department, I imagine having a conversation with my conscience, otherwise known as the pretty little blonde girl who I married a few years before that. And she sees me coming home, of course, and she goes, what are you doing home? And I said, I just quit my job. And she goes, what? So I explain it to her, that I'm a liar and a hypocrite, I don't keep my oath, and I don't even know anything about the Constitution, yet I took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. I've never read the Utah Constitution. I took an oath to uphold and defend it. I said, I can't do that. I'm not going to be. And she goes, could you do me one little favor? Now remember, ladies, she's not even there. I'm having this conversation with her, and she's not even there. But I knew how it was going to go down. And she goes, could you do one favor for me and consider one thing? And I said, sure. Would you consider keeping your job and quit being a liar and a hypocrite? Repentance, of course. Why didn't I think of that? Because that's why I married her, so she could think that for me. So I put back my Sam Brown, I put back my badge, and I decided that I was not going to be an oath breaker anymore as a peace officer, that I was going to know and understand the Constitution, that I would obey the Constitution, both of Utah and the United States Constitution. And I'm studying it. And not only that, but I got the World Book Encyclopedia that says U.S. Constitution, and I kept that in my patrol car for a week so I could read the Constitution when I wasn't on another call. Probably the best time I ever spent as a cop, trying to find out what my oath of office is. And I studied the Constitution, and I read it several times, especially the Bill of Rights. Then I started reading things about the Founding Fathers. And then another miracle happens while I'm doing this. And a notice was on the police bulletin board, Provo Police Department, said, Constitutional Studies for Law Enforcement Officers. And the instructor's name was Dr. W. Cleon Skousen. I knew this man. He used to work in the FBI with my father. My father retired from the FBI. And I told him, I'm going to this. They said, we're not sending anybody to this training. Dr. Skousen isn't mainstream. I said, then I'll take vacation days and I'll go anyway. It was at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. 240 cops were at this training seminar. Certified police training through Utah Post. And what are we studying? The Constitution. And the actual book that we're studying and the workbook we're studying, The Making of America. It changed my life. And I still have that book that Dr. Skousen signed to me that day. And while I was sitting in the audience and he was talking about these things, and he was talking about what the founders went through, and he talked about their dedication and their oath that they pledged to each other, mutually pledging their lives and their fortunes and their sacred honor for the holy cause of liberty so that we could be here today, so that we could watch our government today destroy everything about that, what they did for us. And I took another oath, and I was the only one to hear it, and maybe it was a prayer, but I promised that I would never be on the wrong side again. And I kept that. And then at one point, Dr. Skousen got up, and he had all of us big, tough cops get up, and he taught us a little kindergarten exercise, the preamble to sign language. I've never forgot it. And I had tears running down my face when he taught us this. If you can imagine that picture, 240 cops, all standing there with Dr. Skousen up on this platform up at the front, leading us in the preamble of the United States. He taught us all that. And then he asked me, when he gave me the book, he said, make me a promise. And I said, anything. He said, promise me that you'll teach these things to your children. I have. And I've started teaching them to my grandchildren, too. And now I teach them all across the United States. And I've been to all 50 states, trying to get people to remember, especially peace officers, to remember their oath of office. And it led me to write a book called The County Sheriff, America's Last Hope. And the sequel that I hope every one of you will take home with you today is, Are You a David? Are you a David? And my dear friends, if you want the best book in America to describe who the enemy is, who the Goliath is today, who the Goliath is, but more importantly, who are the Davids that are supposed to stop him today? It's the best book in America as far as providing a legitimate, honest, lawful, peaceful solution to what's going on. I don't get up in front of people anymore and talk about the horrible things going on in America. We could do that all day and until next year and not even scratch the surface. And yes, we have to know what's going on, or we're not going to know who the enemy is. And Sun Tzu, in his Art of War, said, you have to know the enemy, and you have to know you, or you're going to lose every battle. You cannot win against an enemy you don't know. And if you don't know what your enemy is doing, you can't defeat him either. So we must know ourselves, we must know our duty, we must know who the Davids are, and we must know who Goliath is. How are you going to attack him if you don't know who he is? The book tells you, in no uncertain terms, there is a solution, there is hope. And we're going to go over some of that today. And just so you know, that all of this conversion that I went through with Dr. Skousen and that lady that I almost gave a ticket to, and I hope I run into her again someday, and I'll be speaking somewhere in Utah, and she'll walk up afterwards and say, I'd like to give you a hug, that was me. I'd really like to shake her hand big time and thank her for changing my life. Because after I ran for sheriff in Graham County, Arizona in 1988, in 1994, I became the first sheriff in American history to sue the federal government, take the case all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and win a landmark decision on state sovereignty. I told the federal government they could not tell me what to do, that they are not my boss, and that they're not the boss of any other sheriff in this country. As a matter of fact, you're not the boss of anybody in Arizona. And guess what? The United States Supreme Court, in a 5-4 split decision, agreed that they are not our boss, and that the states are not, and I'm quoting page 5, the states are not subject to federal direction. Don't you wish your state knew that? Show them this. This is a highlighted version of my Supreme Court victory. It's back on the table. Now, I want to talk to you about a very dear friend of mine who was a David, and he even made the front page of Time magazine. Time magazine. Now, this issue is October of 1995. We actually had Davids in 1995. He wasn't a sheriff. He was a county commissioner in Nevada, Nye County, Nevada. And recently, you just heard earlier Paul Snover talking about Phil Lyman, a county commissioner in San Juan County, Utah, who was arrested for doing something similar that Dick Carver did. But Dick Carver never got arrested. And maybe there was a reason why. Because when he went there to protest what the BLM and the Forest Service were doing, he was on a bulldozer. It's really difficult to arrest somebody on a bulldozer, let me tell you that. Especially if the Forest Service is down there in front of him and 150 people showed up to back what he did. Well, you see, a road washed out in Nye County, and the Forest Service says, no, you can't fix it. You cannot repair the road. We have to do our environmental impact studies before you put a road, a dirt road, back the way it was before the flood. Amazing, isn't it? This is your federal government. They specialize in red tape and nonsense, and more red tape and more nonsense and more bureaucratic baloney, okay? So finally, after hearing so many complaints from Nye County citizens that the road isn't repaired, the Nye County Commission, there's all three of them, voted unanimously to fix the road, even though the U.S. Forest Service says you can't fix the road or we'll arrest you. They voted unanimously to fix the road, and they assigned Dick Carver to fix the road. 150 people, citizens who lived in that area, who were sick and tired of the federal government messing up their lifestyle with not allowing them egress, ingress on that road, showed up and backed him. And there were 2 or 3 deputies. The sheriff didn't show up, but 2 or 3 of his deputies did. The Forest Service stands in the way. 2 of their agents stand in the way and say, get down from there or you're going to be under arrest. So Dick Carver got down, walked over to the deputies and said, if those agents get in my way again, you arrest them or I'll run over them. So he got back up on his bulldozer, moved forward. The agents moved out of the way. He fixes the road in a couple hours. It's all done. You could see the environmental impact right then and there. You didn't have to spend a year studying it. There was none. He put the berms back where they belonged on both sides, filled up the hole, and everything was fine. And this environmental whack nonsense that the EPA and the Forest Service and others adhere to is just that, a bunch of nonsense. But that's what our federal government specializes in. If you don't believe me, start reading the 2,800-page Obamacare law or nonsense. So Dick Carver gets on Time magazine, and the title of the whole thing is, Don't Tread on Me. An inside look at the West's growing rebellion. Now, he was never arrested. Everything went fine. They were not fined by the federal government or anything. They had all those threats. And then I started looking at a lot of other cases where similar things take place in America. And just about every time, the federal government backs down, especially if your David is there. Now, on the front cover of the book, do you see the David on the front? She's right here. She is right here. I was going to put myself on the front cover. I can put myself on the cover. It's my book. I wrote it. But I fired me. And I put her on. And this is Sheriff Pamela Elliott from Edwards County, Texas. Because I thought, what a great attention getter. Ask the question, are you a David? To a female sheriff. There's only 15 female sheriffs in the entire United States. She's one of them. She's a David. She'll tell you she's a David. But David wasn't there when Dick Carver did this. So he didn't have the backing of the sheriff. I don't know what happened with Phil Lyman, if his sheriff was there or what happened, or if they charged Phil Lyman later. Because I guarantee you, if the sheriff of San Juan County didn't want Phil Lyman arrested by the feds, he would have never been arrested. If he didn't want him to go to court, he wouldn't have been at court. The sheriff could stop all of that, and should have. And he's actually a pretty good sheriff. So I'm not assailing him in any way, but I'll bet we could have done more. And that's what I say in the book. We have lots of David sheriffs in America today. I kind of thought I was a David sheriff. We stood against the Army Corps of Engineers when they wouldn't let us repair a bridge after a flood that we had in Graham County, Arizona. And there were other things that we stood for on the feds in our county. But I'm going to tell you right now, there's a chapter in here. I should have done more. I didn't do enough. And I'm trying everything I can to make sure that sheriffs now understand that we should be doing more. We have Sheriff Brad Rogers in Elkhart County, Indiana, who stood up to the FDA because they were in his county without checking with him and harassing an Amish farmer. Now, you got to understand this. The FDA is just trying to make sure that all these Amish criminals don't spread all across the country because they don't pasteurize their milk. You let that go somewhere, and pretty soon your whole nation is destroyed by raw milk and raw cheese and raw butter. That's how stupid these guys are in Washington, D.C. You might as well put that on their badge. The stupid officers are now here. And so the Amish are, of course, very passive, aren't they? If a federal agent wants to come in on your property, what's the Amish going to do? Come on in. So they did that time and time again. And they tested all his products. They even sent him to a lab trying to find out something's got to be wrong here. Did they have any probable cause to be there? No. Were they following due process? No. Was there any reason for them to be there? Sure, random audits, spot inspections. You see, the federal government has a real neat program going. It's called Congress will pretend to follow the Constitution, but they can pass legislation to create bureaucracies that don't have to. They don't even have to even consider the Constitution. They can do whatever they want, and then you object, and you go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court goes, oh yeah, they can do whatever they want. So where do you go? Right here. We take back America, county by county and state by state, one sheriff at a time, one county commissioner at a time. You get your county commissioners and your sheriffs working together, you've got the solution. And it's worked several places, and it will still work. And I think we can still get Phil Lyman off. And I just spoke to Phil last week. He's a good man, and he did what he was supposed to do. The other county commissioners should have been there with him, should have had a lot more people there with him. The sheriff's office should have been there out there in force. The sheriff should have been there, and the sheriff should now be telling the U.S. judges and the U.S. marshals and the U.S. attorney's office, drop the charges on this man. You know darn well he did not commit a crime. They've charged him with a crime. He's facing a year in jail for standing up for land rights of the people of San Juan County, Utah. And so Sheriff Brad Rogers was called by the Amish farmer, and he said, hey, you know what? These guys have been here 5 or 6 times. I've totally cooperated. Now I'm tired of playing their game. Would you please come and stop this? So the sheriff told the FDA, if you come into my county again without due process, without probable cause, without duly signed warrants, I will arrest you for trespassing. All true. I've seen the paperwork. Then they write back to Sheriff Rogers and tell him, if you interfere in any way, we will arrest you for obstruction of justice. They're going to arrest the sheriff. So Rogers, having been the second sheriff in America to have our constitutional sheriff and peace officer CSPOA constitutional training, Sheriff Mack constitutional training class, that I basically copied from Cleon Skousen, he knew the answer to all of this. And he calls me and he says, hey, will you help me write a letter back to them responding to their threat of arresting me? He says, I'm not intimidated at all. He says, I think it might even be fun if they tried to arrest me. But he says, let's just respond and let's see what happens. So we wrote up a response. If any of you want to see that response, email me and I'll send it back to you. Sheriff Mack at Hotmail. sheriffmack@hotmail.com. And I got cards over there for you too. So we send that to him, and about 3 days later, David Hostetler, the Amish farmer, gets a certified letter from the FDA telling him that everything was dropped. The FDA left town, and they have not been back for almost 3 years now. You see, do you see the solution now? What if we had hundreds of sheriffs like that all across America, standing and conducting themselves according to the Constitution and their oath of office, not being intimidated by all the threats of the bureaucrats from Washington, doing what their job requires them to do, And you have to know and understand this one word. It's in the book quite a bit, but interposition. Do you know that the Founding Fathers actually talked about nullification and interposition? And I'm talking about Madison and Jefferson in the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. Can you imagine? They actually talked about nullification and local officials interposing their power to make sure that their citizens were not being victimized by the federal government. Way back in 1789, 90, whatever it was, way back then, they understood the principle and doctrine of interposition. You see, a true David doesn't get violent. A true David stands in the way. And he makes sure that things are so messy for Goliath that he leaves and goes somewhere else. We don't have to hit him in the head with a stone. We might have to arrest him a time or two just so he gets the message. But if you interpose and you exercise your authority and you exercise a little courage and a little faith and you have the people standing behind you, you'll win. Now, another story that is in my book also is one of my favorite American history stories. And Paul showed us this a little while ago also. Rosa Parks. Now, do you know what Rosa Parks did? She defied stupid law. And the enforcement of stupid law is the essence of tyranny. Edmund Burke. So why do we have all these officers that come out around and say, well, we have to enforce all laws, we don't get to pick and choose? First of all, that's nonsense. In fact, that's a lie. We do not enforce all laws, and we choose how we enforce laws. If that lady running the stop sign in front of me, if I had waved at her, or if I just beeped at her with my siren, or I turned on my lights, or I completely ignored her, that was my choice. She pulled over, so I stopped her. You know, I didn't have to stop her. I got in behind her. She already pulled over. She knew I was going to come after her. If she hadn't pulled over, maybe I wouldn't have. I don't know. But I was writing her a ticket. Do I have to write? Is there a law that says I have to write her a ticket? Of course not. No. We do not enforce all laws. If we did, the laws in Arizona and Utah forbidding cohabitation, we would have arrested over half the police officers in the state. So we don't, and we know we don't. So we use what? As a rule, as the index, as the measuring stick. We use the Bill of Rights and the Constitution itself and the principles of our Constitution. And when we enforce those, it's okay. We're going to be ending up on the right side every time. And you're not going to see all these YouTube videos of cops abusing 72-year-old women or tasing people for saying no, or they didn't cooperate right, or kicking a female suspect in the head while she's down on the ground handcuffed. Stuff like that. We're not going to see that anymore because we are patriots. We have officers who are trained properly in their oath of office, in the Constitution, in our duty to America, in that we are the guards of the American Republic, and that we're not these thug enforcers with our big boots and big badges and big guns on, and that we're right because might makes right. No. If we're properly trained, this will all change. And if we start looking at our jobs through the prism of the Constitution and our oath of office, it'll all change. And my dear friends, Sheriff Rogers did the right thing. If he had been arrested, he still would have done the right thing. Rosa Parks did the right thing. Then we had two sworn officers, two sworn constitutional guards that got on the bus and arrested her. Do you know that she was actually hauled off to jail in handcuffs. Do you know the crime she committed? In America? Do you know the crime she committed? She failed to give her seat to a white man. Yes, 100 years after the Civil War. She failed to give her seat to a white man, so she was hauled off to jail. This wasn't just a custom, it was a law. What should have happened that day? David should have got on the bus. The sheriff should have got on the bus with a deputy behind him. He walks up to Rosa Parks and he says, "Ma'am, just what seems to be the problem here?" And she looks up and says, "I don't know. Why can't we be left alone?" Anybody else ever want to say that to the federal government or any other government? Why can't we be left alone? Do you know what you just said? Being left alone by government is the definition of liberty. And that's how it's defined. Government leaves you to make your own choices and run your own life. And the sheriff is touched. And he sits down next to Rosa Parks and he reaches over and shakes her hand. And he says, "Ma'am, what you did here really took a lot of courage. And it would be an honor for my deputy and me to escort you home safely." And they do. In the scenario that should have happened, that's what they do. They take her home, and they then make sure that her husband's shotgun is handy, and that it's loaded, and that it's ready, and promise to give them extra patrol to make sure that they are protected the following few days, to make sure it doesn't get around to hooded knights that they might come take care of her. My dear friends, standing for what's right, even if it's against the law, is what every sheriff should be doing. You know, we were out at the Bundy Ranch, as Wayne was saying when he introduced me. But you know that this is the tale of two sheriffs, and I actually say that in here. Sheriff Gillespie of Clark County, Nevada, refused to stand with the Bundys, refused to do his job, even allowed the federal government to make a free speech corral. Have you ever heard of those? We're not saying you can't have guns. Didn't Biden say that? We're not denying you the Second Amendment. You can have a shotgun. You women can have a shotgun. My wife doesn't like shotguns that much, okay, Mr. Biden? She prefers the AR-15, okay? And when she prefers it, that's what she's going to get. And you're not going to stop her. But when they tell you how you can do it and how you can have it and what kind of ammunition you can have and how much ammunition, that's the federal government violating the law. Let's be real clear here. Gun control in the United States of America, if you read anything the founders said about the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms, you will know that gun control in America is against the law. And your local lawman, your local David should know that, and he should be protecting you from anybody trying to disarm you. And would anybody serving you or that pretends to be your friend try to disarm you? No. And your sheriff is there to defend you, stand with you, interpose on your behalf, and stop gun control because of what he promised to do when he took his job and when he took his oath. So, Rosa Parks' husband had her gun, and that's the way it should have been. And he should have been able to defend himself and his family. And when Clive Bundy was trying to stand and do what's right in Nevada, he was ready to do whatever it takes, even taking a bullet. But you go back to Nye County, Nevada, and you see the exact same situation happening there. The exact same situation happening in Nye County, Nevada just a few years before, and it's with the Wayne Hague family. And that's in the book. You need to know this case because Wayne Hague won in federal court on the same issue. He won after 30, 35 years battling the federal government. 35 years. His first wife dies. His second wife dies. He dies, and his family keep the fight. And when the federal government, the BLM and the Forest Service came to take his cattle, guess who showed up? David did. His name was Sheriff Tony DeMeo. And he says, "You're not taking anybody's cattle. You haven't even had this thing adjudicated in court yet, and you're trying to take their cattle?" And what did the BLM SWAT team, or no, their SWAT team wasn't there yet. What did the BLM tell Sheriff DeMeo? "We have a SWAT team and we're coming back." What did Sheriff DeMeo tell them? "Fine, I've got one too." Pretty simple answer, huh? Did the BLM come back with their SWAT team? Not on your life. They knew they had a David here who wasn't messing around, who wasn't kidding, who wasn't bluffing. Sheriff DeMeo did his job. Sheriff Gillespie was the epitome of not doing his job. We have Sheriff Gillespie in the book to show an example of what no sheriff in this country should ever do. We have the example of several others. Sheriff David A. Clark Jr. from Milwaukee, Sheriff Palmer from Grant County, Oregon, Sheriff Finch from Liberty County, Florida, who nullified the arrest of one of his citizens who was arrested for having a gun in his pocket. Yeah, a law-abiding citizen, not a prohibited felon, a law-abiding citizen who simply had a gun in his pocket, arrested, hauled to jail. Sheriff Finch stopped it. Sheriff Finch was arrested. The CSPOA went out there and defended him and raised money for his defense. He was found not guilty by a jury of his peers and returned to his job. And that's where he is now. He's one of our staunch supporters. My dear friends, it's time to close. But it's time to get busy. Your sheriff needs to hear from you. You need to be working with your sheriff. You have to have a relationship with your sheriff. Local officials standing united with we the people in defense of the Constitution, interposing as the Davids of today, is the solution. Do you know how many peaceful solutions we have left? Maybe one or two. We must exhaust all peaceful means before we resort to anything else. We have to do this. I've dedicated my life to this peaceful process. I'm asking each of you to join us in this holy cause of liberty. You must have this book. Every American home should have this book in it. Go over it with your kids. It's only 150 pages, but you need to see this for yourself. There is a solution. There is legitimate hope. I prove it, and I show you the evidence of this all. Now, if I could, if you'll indulge me, I will close about the same way I close all my speeches nationwide, with what Dr. Skousen taught us that day. I've never forgot it. It's always touched me. And I dedicate it to each of you. I dedicate it to my children, my wife, my grandchildren. My first granddaughter was born right here in Provo 9 years ago, tomorrow. She was born on the 4th of July. And her name is Liberty. And I love my grandkids, and I love my kids, and I love my wife. I love this country. God, family, and country. That's what we've got to stand for. And I close with Dr. Skousen's lesson to me, and I want you to remember, I learned this at police training, and it goes like this. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. And that's the eagle. Long may she be free.